So as we all know that unemployment is one of the most hot topic in any general or public debate, as it can impact both the citizens and economy of a particular state. So in this video we will do a critical analysis of unemployment in India and try to find out its root main cause. So let's firstly define the term unemployment. So unemployment is a condition in which a person is able, willing to do work but can't find it. So there are mainly two popular arguments through which we can define unemployment in India. First one is lack of growth and second one is lack of jobs. So let's look at our first argument, which is lack of growth. So the economic growth is inversely proportional to the unemployment. It means if the economic growth of a country raises, the unemployment will going to fall. And being a developing country, if we compare India's economy with the other developing nations such as Bangladesh, Kenya, Philippines, and and so on, so their average economic growth is stood at somewhere around 4%, whereas India's economic growth, especially after post 1990s, our average economic growth in last 5 years has been around 3% points greater than that of other emerging market economies, which is 7.5%. So the lack of growth is not a suitable argument to define the unemployment in India. Whereas some economists suggest a far better argument, which is the falling employment elasticity. So employment elasticity is the ratio of employment growth in percent to the economic growth. So let's take example to understand this better. If the employment elasticity of a nation is 2:8, it means the 2% economic growth is coming from the newly joined workers, and remaining 6% is coming from other factors, and the most influential factor is the increase in productivity of previously working workers. So if we look at the stats of the Indian employment elasticity, so from this graph, ladies and gentlemen, we can observe that employment elasticity has been falling, and in the period between 2004 to 2009 it fell to around 0.01%, reflecting that almost entire growth was attributable to productivity in the economy, hence create much less number of jobs. Even though it grows faster, this has led many economists to characterize India's growth being jobless in nature. So to understand this argument, let's take the reference of a survey conducted by the International Labour Organization. So on observing long-term trend, we see that unemployment rate has not been rising and is range bound between 5 to 6%. Had the growth been jobless, it would have increased. Since it is not rising, it would be wrong to characterize growth as being jobless. So this argument is also not true. Let's see our second argument, which is lack of jobs. So to understand this, let us assume this smaller circle represents the growth of labor force and this bigger circle represents the growth of employment in India. So from the recent surveys, we observed that the labor force growth in India is stood at 1.3%, whereas the employment growth is stood somewhere around 1.5%. But later we used to create employment on the rate of 1.7%. So we can see that 1.5% is lesser than the 1.7%, but it is still greater than the labor force growth. It means we may be creating lesser number of jobs per unit of economic growth, but as long as we create jobs at a pace greater than the pace of labor force growth, the number of jobs would be adequate and unemployment rate will not rise. In fact, we observe from various state level surveys that the number of jobs created has always been greater than number of people that enter labor force. Thus, jobless may be a misleading label. So, like, what is that truly defines the unemployment in India? And it is the mismatch in labor market, or you can say the mismatch between the aspirations and skill a particular candidate possess. So, to understand this better, let's take a reference of graph. So, the x-axis here represents the skills of worker has, and y-axis represents the number of workers. It is obvious that the number of managers is always lesser than number of workers. And but he and here on this graph, x-axis represents the skills required to do a particular job. So that this job requires maximum number of skills. You can say this job is like of an IAS officer, a chartered accountant, and so on. So with this level of skill, a person is able to get this job, but he will not take it because it can't pace with his aspiration. So it will become voluntary unemployed. Whereas he wants to take this job because it can pace with his aspiration, but he doesn't have enough skills to get this job. Hence, he will become structural unemployment. So now I think you guys have better idea that why it is important to have some professional skills to get that job which can pace with your aspirations. And also, I think that's enough for today. Thanks for watching.